Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us again. My name is Nils Roman. I'm the director of the Ackerman Center and the dean of the Bass School, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this year's Michael and Elaine Jaffe lecture. It's actually the fourth time that this lecture is taking place, and the two of them are here. Michael and Elaine, Michael. There they are. Thank you again. It reminds me that it was the Jaffe family that created actually our first endowment, the Jaffe, for the creation of the Jaffe Library, and really allowed us over the years to build up a substantial Holocaust library. And therefore, in a certain way, it's quite befitting that today's lecture is about building up other type of an archive and of a library of witnesses to mass atrocities, in particular in Eastern Europe and beyond. I'm obviously referring to the work that's by now familiar to most of you of Yachad Inunum. We all had an opportunity to listen to Father Dubois, but today we have another opportunity to learn more about the exceptional work of that organization, because we are now in the presence of Marco Gonzalez, who was here already a couple of weeks ago. We're also still hosting one of the exhibits just on the backside of this building. If you ever have a moment, you can just kind of walk through the door and enter the next building where there's an exhibit about women on the front lines of violence, portraits, which comes from your organization as well. And as I've already said, I'm really thrilled for the opportunity to have you here, because we've been trying to do this already, as I may have mentioned, for a couple of years. We had a really good go at it in January 2020, but our timing was unfortunately off. Nothing moved for, as you remember, for about 2 years because of the pandemic. But we are now really welcoming you back to our campus, and thereby also exploring opportunities to work together. So let me introduce Marco. Marco Gonzalez is the director of Yachad Inunum, Together in One, a non-governmental organization with over 20 years of investigative experience dedicated to discovering genocide wherever it is found around the world, providing documented proof of crimes against humanity, and serving as a voice of protest on behalf of all past and present victims of systematic hate crimes and mass murder. Working closely with the organization's renowned president and founder, Father Patrick Dubois, Marco and his teams have been across the landscape of Eastern Europe, documenting the locations of mass graves and interviewing witnesses and bringing all that evidence together with archival resources in a fantastic website that serves many students and scholars around the world to really start understanding something about what you more commonly call Holocaust by bullets, in other words, another aspect of the Holocaust and its violence. Thank you all for being here. Please join me in welcoming Marco to the stage.
Thank you very much, Dr. Romer. Thank you, Michael and Elaine Jaffe, to being here. It's an honor to be the first speaker of this conference this morning. And there is also a challenge because Father Dubois just spoke a couple of weeks here. Before I begin to talk about the work that our organization is doing, I would like to show you a short film, that presents on a better way with images the work that our organization is doing on the Holocaust, but also in more recent mass crimes and genocides.
Tout a commencé dans un petit village en Ukraine, Ravaruska. On savait qu'il y avait beaucoup de Juifs avant la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, et on se demandait qu'est-ce qui s'est passé avec les Juifs, puisqu'aujourd'hui il n'y a personne. En fait, ils ont été amenés au milieu de la forêt et ils ont été assassinés, fusillés.
Et puis on a découvert que les Juifs n'étaient pas enterrés, que personne ne savait où c'était, que personne ne voulait parler, que tout le monde disait il n'y a jamais eu de fusillade.
On arrive et on retrouve des gens âgés, des villageois. Ils nous racontent ce qui s'est passé avec les derniers juifs de Rabarouska, ce qu'ils ont vu.
Et ils ont assisté aux fusillades de leurs voisins, parce qu'ils étaient les voisins des juifs ou des tziganes ou des communistes.
Quand on pense à l'Holocauste, c'est vrai que la première idée qui nous vient à l'esprit, c'est les camps de concentration, c'est Auschwitz. On ne se rend pas compte qu'il y a eu autant de fusillades, de fosses communes.
On est loin de s'imaginer la proportion que la Shoah par balle a prise tout au long de la guerre, en fait, sur le front, avec les unités mobiles qui ont massacré des personnes dans des centaines, voire des milliers de villages.
On se rend compte que ce n'était pas caché, c'était en public. Puisque c'est un génocide qui a été fait à la main, avec des hommes qui ont tué des autres hommes. Chaque victime a vu son assassin, et chaque assassin a vu sa victime. Et c'est comme ça que nous avons commencé à enquêter village par village en Europe de l'Est pour trouver les preuves de ces assassinats des Juifs et des Tziganes. Mais avant tout ça, il y a des équipes qui travaillent à Paris, dans les bureaux de Yahad Inounou, et qui préparent ces voyages de recherche. Il y a tout un travail aussi scientifique et méthodologique qui a été développé.
Cette méthodologie s'articule en fait en plusieurs étapes. Une première étape qui consiste en un travail de documentation, que ce soit des archives allemandes, des archives soviétiques, des archives polonaises, des archives roumaines.
Pour mener les enquêtes, Yad a la possibilité d'accéder aux archives de Ludwigsburg, où il se trouve les dossiers judiciaires contre les bourreaux allemands.
On traite des témoignages, on fait des recherches sur chaque village, sur chaque région, chaque communauté, ce qu'elles ont vécu pendant la guerre et comment elles ont évolué après. Tant que cela est possible, parce qu'évidemment c'est une course contre la montre, les personnes vieillissent, les personnes meurent. Donc c'est très important ce qu'on fait, puisque un jour elles ne seront plus là pour raconter ce qu'elles ont vécu.
Et depuis 16 ans, eh bien, on frappe à la porte et on demande « Est-ce que vous étiez là, madame ?» et « Est-ce que vous étiez là, monsieur ?» Et si la personne répond « Oui », eh bien, on essaie de sauver la mémoire de l'Europe.
On ne le fait pas froidement, ce n'est pas des enquêtes chirurgicales, elles sont précises, elles sont scientifiques, mais elles sont quand même humaines. Il y a toujours une empathie très importante avec les témoins et avec les survivants.
Il nous donne la description très précise de ce qui s'est passé, de l'arrivée des Juifs, du déshabillage sur place, de comment ils étaient agenouillés devant la fosse, des fusillades, de l'Allemand qui donne l'ordre de tirer et avant que les bourreaux, visiblement ivres, tirent, du camion qui vient à la fin pour récupérer les vêtements. Ce sont des informations qu'on ne trouve pas dans les archives, ce sont des informations vraiment de quelqu'un qui était sur les lieux.
On interviewe autant des killers que des gens qui ont sauvé des Juifs.
Ce que nous voulons savoir, c'est ce qui s'est passé.
Une enquête policière, une enquête criminelle dans les villages, de façon très locale, pour savoir ce qu'est devenu la communauté juive locale, comment ils ont été tués et où sont leurs cadavres actuellement, donc localiser les fosses communes.
Les équipes de Yahad Dinounoum travaillent notamment avec des experts balistiques dans certains pays, puisque sur chaque douille, vous avez un lieu de fabrication et une année de fabrication. Et une réapparition de certaines mouvances, notamment de mouvances négationnistes, quand vous pouvez leur présenter des douilles que vous trouvez sur un lieu de massacre, des objets, des documents d'identité ou des artefacts qui sont liés à la tradition et à la religion juive, vous pouvez vite comprendre que les victimes sont des juifs.
Il y a toujours des angles morts dans les génocides, dans les crimes de masse, dans les crimes en général. Et nous, notre mission, c'est aussi d'aller dans ces angles morts-là.
Donc on est, je dirais, dans la zone grise de l'humanité. C'est un challenge difficile parce qu'il a fallu admettre que finalement les voisins des Juifs ou des Tziganes sont contents parce qu'ils auront la maison, parce qu'ils auront les filles, parce qu'ils auront l'argent, les bijoux, les chaussures.
C'est toujours inconfortable, c'est toujours difficile, dangereux, souvent dangereux, disons. Mais c'est nécessaire parce que si ces angles morts-là sont laissés vacants, c'est la porte ouverte à une déformation de l'histoire, à une utilisation politique de l'histoire.
Nous avons collecté plus de 7000 témoignages. Et grâce à ces témoignages-là, on arrive à comprendre ces mécanismes d'assassinat qui nous a fait comprendre comment ça marche un génocide. Les pères de voix parlent très souvent qu'ils n'aiment pas quand on dit never again, plus jamais. Parce que malheureusement, après la Shoah, il y a eu des autres génocides, des autres violences de masse qui se sont passées.
Tout part de la haine de l'autre, tout part de la peur de l'autre et de l'incompréhension de l'autre aussi, de ce qu'est l'autre et de ce qu'il représente.
Parce que cette population est différente, parce que cette population a des origines différentes, parce que cette population a une religion différente. Et c'est ça qui nous permet aujourd'hui de pouvoir agir quand il se passe quelque chose dans le monde. C'est ça qui nous a amenés dans les petits villages des peuples quichés au Guatemala, pour essayer de comprendre aussi ce qui s'est passé pendant les années 80. Selon les historiens, il y a eu entre 250 000 et 500 000 victimes.
Là encore, on a interviewé des femmes, des hommes qui ont survécu. Je me souviens de cette femme qui était enceinte de 8 mois, qui a été violée et dont la fille maintenant est handicapée à vie, alors que l'on tuait son mari et ses autres enfants. Je me souviens de ce groupe de femmes qui n'osaient rien dire et tout d'un coup, l'une d'elles, la plus jolie, a dit « on a toutes été violées ». On était enfermés dans une grange et les hommes venaient les uns après les autres. Et donc ça nous a ouvert à nouveau la zone grise des massacres de masse dont personne ne parle, que tout le monde oublie, parce que c'est pas à la mode, parce que ça n'attire pas les médias.
Mais il y a plusieurs points communs dans la tuerie, dans la haine, peu importe finalement l'histoire que peut avoir le pays et les communautés visées, au Guatemala encore une fois, en Irak maintenant, mais aussi au Rwanda, le modèle de la Shoah par balle que nous, ici à Yara, on documente, qui est aussi utilisé dans ces différents endroits, avec des améliorations pour certains, des améliorations plutôt lugubres et morbides, mais des améliorations dans les méthodes d'exécution et dans la façon de traiter les victimes.
Et puis est arrivé le génocide des Yazidis par Daesh. Lorsque moi-même j'ai vu les images à la télévision, que l'on parlait d'un génocide, j'ai pris le temps de prier 3 jours. Et après 3 jours, ça m'a paru clair qu'il fallait aller en Irak.
Et pour lui, c'était insoutenable de regarder toutes ces images à la télévision où on voyait toutes ces femmes, enfants et des hommes yazidis qui étaient en train de se faire massacrer en Irak. C'est surtout des femmes et des enfants qui ont réussi à s'échapper de Daesh. Dans ces cas-là, on ne parle pas de témoins, on parle de survivants.
On a filmé plus de 400 survivants, survivantes qui sortent des griffes de Daesh. Les récits sont terribles.
On a été contactés par les administrations françaises qui avaient des questions sur les enfants français qui revenaient. C'était évidemment des enfants très difficiles à gérer. On leur donnait une image précise, grâce au regard des Yézidis, une image précise de ce que c'était pour un enfant de vivre sous Daesh. Ils voyaient des condamnés à mort crucifiés dans les rues, où les condamnés à mort sont exposés sur des grilles de square, où on lapide des gens, où on jette des gens par les immeubles légalement. Ce sont des peines légales que les enfants voyaient. Donc ces enfants n'ont pas été protégés, eux. Ils ont vu la violence, on leur a enseigné la violence. C'est assez clair que c'est une éducation qui rend les enfants dangereux. C'est une éducation qui doit être déconstruite.
Et puis nous avons ouvert des centres pour les rétablir, entre guillemets, dans leur identité. Et nous avons la joie de voir plus de la moitié des jeunes retrouver la vie, le sourire, la joie.
Et ça a été un tournant pour Yaradinounoum, ce moment-là. D'organisation de recherche, d'organisation de recueil de preuves et d'enseignements, on a développé une expertise d'aide aux survivants. fait, c'est ça. Yarat se situe vraiment du côté des victimes oubliées. Oubliées par l'histoire, parce qu'elles étaient loin, parce qu'elles étaient soviétiques, parce qu'elles étaient en bas de l'échelle des koufars.
Yarat, c'est pas simplement la mémoire, c'est pas simplement les crimes, c'est aussi l'avenir. Il faut que l'on s'occupe des victimes de ces massacres aujourd'hui et en prenant en compte, je dirais, la zone grise qui les habite aussi, puisqu'eux-mêmes sont devenus la plupart des terroristes.
Et c'est la raison pour laquelle c'est important d'enseigner la Shoah, pas uniquement comme un fait historique, comme quelque chose qui s'est passé il y a 70 ans, il y a 80 ans, pour montrer aux nouvelles générations ce qui est un génocide, ce qui est une violence de masse. Ça doit avoir un impact aujourd'hui.
Certains sont mobilisés par le réchauffement climatique et c'est très important. Certains par l'écologie et c'est très important. Mais tous les jours aussi, on tue, on égorge, on met des bombes. Une fois c'est à Kaboul, alors bon, Kaboul c'est loin. Une fois c'est au Nigeria, oh ben on ne sait pas trop où c'est. Et puis tout d'un coup, c'est pas loin de Paris. Tout d'un coup, c'est à Nice. Tout d'un coup, c'est à Orlando. Tout d'un coup, c'est dans les banlieues de Brooklyn. Tout d'un coup, c'est à Pittsburgh. Alors là, on est touché. On est touché parce que c'est les voisins. Et il faut que des générations de jeunes se lèvent demain. On ne peut pas déléguer la responsabilité de la planète uniquement à la police et aux services secrets. Il faut que chacun prenne ses responsabilités. Yarat, c'est aussi pour connecter d'autres personnes qui dorment mal lorsque l'on tue quelqu'un très loin. Si on continue à bien dormir, on va se réveiller dans un cauchemar.
Thank you. So I think that you have an idea of the work that our organization is doing for 20 years. And I would like to start my lecture today with a statement. And I want to say that the Holocaust is a unique event in history, and it has to be thought and studied without any comparison to other genocides. Nevertheless, in the part of the Holocaust investigated by our organization, Jihad in Unum, in Eastern Europe, the Holocaust by bullets, what we call the Holocaust by bullets, has a legacy for modern mass crimes and genocides. And this is what I would like to share with you this morning. Reading the program this morning, I read the title again, which says There and Then, Here and Now. And this is exactly what I'm trying to tell you this morning. It's very powerful because we always remember the Holocaust there and then 80 years ago. But also we need to be aware of what is happening here and now. I don't think that we can only see the Holocaust as part of the history, but I think that we need to take the consequences of what it was, this genocide, and how we can apply it to what is happening today in our society and in our world. If we close our eyes for 5 seconds, we heard the word Holocaust. I think the first images that come to our mind are Auschwitz, the concentration camps, the deportation, the mass chambers, and all these killings that happen on an industrial way. It was thing that Auschwitz became the symbol of the Holocaust. In our memory, in our collective memory, every time that we speak about the Holocaust, we think of all these elements that made the Holocaust unique and also a terrible part of the history of the last century. But the investigations that we've been doing with Jihad in Unum brings another part of this history that is less known, When we talk about the Holocaust by bullets, this was not invented by our organization. In fact, it was the first articles that were shown in the press, in the newspapers in France, and a very well-known journalist in France called it a priest, discovered the Holocaust by bullets. Because we were talking about mass crimes, about shootings and mass execution sites all over Eastern Europe. We knew very few about that, and it's because before the Soviet Union collapsed, it was almost impossible to get there and also to get archives and information. I'm going to tell you a little bit how do we work, how do we investigate, and how we succeeded to understand this mechanism that happened in Eastern Europe. As you could see in the movie, we work with archives, and then we collect testimonies. There is a scientific way to work on these crimes, village by village. I remember when we began with Father Dubois. Father Dubois, it just happened like that. Father Dubois was going to Ukraine on a little town called Ravaruska. His grandfather was deported there as a French military. And his grandfather came back from that camp, and he never told the story of what he saw. But he always told Father Dubois what happened in the camp was awful, but what happened outside the camp was even worse. So Father Dubois went in the late 90s with a group of grandchildren of these deportees to build a memorial there. Father Dubois was at that time appointed to from the Catholic Church for the relationship with Jews in France. And he asked what happened with the Jews in Ravaruska. At the same time, Ravaruska is a little town in the border with Poland. So it was very close to Belzec. So everybody thought, in any case, that the Jews living in Ravaruska were deported to Belzec because it was very close. But in fact, the Jews of Ravaruska were killed and buried into mass graves in the middle of the forest. But what was the more surprising of all this is the father was succeeded with the mayor of Ravaruska to go to this in the middle of in the forest and meet all people who were willing to tell the stories of what had happened. And then we realized that these killings were in public. They were children, they were teenagers at that time, and they saw and they tell everything they remember. They told to us. So the mayor of Ravaruska said, well, Father, wow, you know what I did for you here, we could do it in all the neighbor villages in Ukraine. And that's how we began our work. Thinking that these were isolated cases, I mean, there were a few mass graves here and another mass graves in another village, without imagining at that time, 20 years later, that in fact it was a whole continent of extermination for the Jews and the Roma in Eastern Europe. And this is what keeps in the collective memory. There are two memories, memory in the West that always remember the camps, the gas chambers and the deportations, and a memory in the East where people there remember the killings of their neighbors, the Jews of the village. Two memories that for many years didn't convert themselves, never dialogue themselves. And today it gives us a whole picture of what the magnitude of what was the Holocaust. A couple of months after we began to do this work in Ravaruska, we went to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and in fact, they had a copy of 16 million of archives the Soviet Commission, all handwritten. So they made a scan of all these documents, but nobody used it. They thought that it was a Nazi propaganda. We're talking about more than 20 years ago. So many things have changed since there. And in fact, we took some of these archives and we began to read them to know what happened in the villages where we're thinking to go and investigate. And we realized that, in fact, all the information in these Soviet archives in the Soviet Commission were real. They went back after the war, and they went to the villages, they interviewed the local people. In many cases, they opened the mass graves to count the bodies. And all this information is in these Soviet archives. So this is the base of our work before we go in the field. And then we succeeded to have an agreement with the archives of Ludwigsburg, where we have all these trials against the Nazis, the Germans. And of course, when they were giving their testimony, you can find all the information of the crimes they committed. When you convert both sources, the Soviet archives and the Ludwigsburg archives, then you have already an idea of what happened village by village. Once we have this information, a team goes in the villages, and they are looking for the elder people, those who were children or teenagers at the time. Sometimes we knock at the door, sometimes we go in the middle of the market, and with only one question: "Ma'am, did you see what happened to the Jews? Ma'am, did you know Jews during the Second World War?" And what is surprising is most of the time, I will say 99%, when a witness doesn't want to speak, is because it has at some point some bad things to hide. They accept to speak and to give the testimony, and they remember the details. And in many cases, they speak for the very first time. And when they say, "Why you never told those stories before?" And I say, "Because nobody came to ask for it." So you must understand they are very natural people. They are living in villages where nothing has changed since 80 years. So the memory is present still in their brains because not many things have changed since they were children there. So the witnesses, they tell us what they saw. And during these 20 years of investigation, we were thinking, how can we sum up what happened in a village? We decided to sum up the methodology used by the Nazis to make disappear all the Jews from a village with 5 steps. Because we realized that most of the witnesses, they were telling us when they saw how they arrest the Jews in the village, in many cases, the Jews were put in a special neighborhood surrounded the night before. Women were raped, but of course this does not appear in the archives. And the next day, the witnesses are driving through the main street many times in the village until the place where the mass grave has been prepared. You must understand that they succeeded to do this genocide with mass graves because they used the Soviet system. So the Soviets were used to be required to do some work. So the Germans called the mayor of the village 1 day or 2 days before, and I say, "Okay, how many Jews you have?" They knew how many Jews. They have 20 Jews or they have 200 Jews. So they calculate the size of the mass grave. And I say to the mayor, "Okay, I need you to prepare a mass grave with this and this size." So when they arrested the Jews in the night most of the time, and then they made them walk until the mass grave in front of all the people in the village. You must understand there is a small village, so there's not too much to do there. So it was a kind of a spectacle. All the people from the village were looking at the Jews going through the main street until the mass grave. When they arrived to the mass grave, they made the Jews to undress. I will say that one of the reasons is to humiliate them until the last minute, but also there was another reason is to get back all the clothes of the Jews and also to try to find jewels or coins or any value object that they could hide in their clothes. And in many cases, and this is like a very human question that you find in other genocides is many of the neighbors tell us about how they were cold because they didn't have clothes or didn't have shoes. And in many cases, after the killings, they were taking back the belongings of the Jews to dress themselves with the belongings of the Jews. At the end of the killings, half of the village was dressed with the Jews' clothes and shoes. So once this happened, they asked the Jews to go into the mass graves. And I think most of you are scholars, and I think that all of you have seen all these archival pictures of mass graves. There's also a couple of videos, the Germans, the Nazi killing the Jews into the mass graves. So they killed the Jews in the mass graves and they buried them. And they leave to the next village. You must understand that for the Einsatzgruppen, these special units created by the Germans, the only objective was to kill the Jews, village by village, at the same time that the Germans were going east. So they were conquering territories, and at the same time, the only mission was to exterminate the last Jew they found in all these villages. And this is how we have collected more than 7,000 testimonies of witnesses. In this case, are not survivors. In this case, are not perpetrators, because those who were with the Germans were judged by the Soviets after the Second World War. Many of them were punished, went to jail, or were to Siberia. But they were children. They were teenagers. They were passive or active in the way they participated or not into these killings. But it changes also from this mystic theory that we have that the Holocaust was in secret. And in fact, in Eastern Europe, it was public. And in many cases, it was a spectacle for all the people. Father Watt tells many times when he speaks, he gives a terrible testimony, and at the same time, it was part of the life there. And it was a children who was looking for a good place to watch the killings of the Jews. And he said, but why were you willing to see the killings? And this witness said, because it was very interesting for us, the children. And sometimes even the teachers brought the whole class to see the execution of the Jews. And they grew up with this in their minds. So this is how we understood in many cases what happened with the Jews, and also how this memory and this information kept silence for so many years. And this is why it was important for our organization to do this work, to bring back the memory of all these forgotten Jews in Eastern Europe. Why is that we didn't talk too much about that before, 30 years ago or 20 years ago, besides the fact that it was under Soviet Union, because there were not many survivors. And I will never forget an article, that when this article in the newspaper Le Monde appears in France, I got a call in the office from someone who said, my father read the article this morning, and he began to cry. And then it was his daughter calling to the office, and she said, it was the first time that someone was talking about how he succeeded to survive. And in fact, he didn't survive from the camps, but he survived from the shootings in Eastern Europe. And it was the first time that he sees that someone is talking about this part of the story that not many people knew. So we can understand, without having many testimonies of the survivors, because not many people survived from the killings in Eastern Europe, that the memory of the Holocaust in this part of the planet keeps in the witnesses. They are the savers of this memory. And in the same way that the Holocaust survivors are passing away, these witnesses also passing away. So that's the reason we are really doing our best to collect as much information as we have from these witnesses to perpetuate the memory, but also to understand the mechanism of killings in all these villages in Eastern Europe. Because without survivors, without many evidences, the memory of the witnesses is very important. At the same time, it brings another perspective from killing, collective killings, and mass killing, or genocide, because most of the time we always want to see the white and black part of a genocide, the victims and the perpetrators. As Father was said in the movie, we are working on the gray zone of this area, bringing another aspect of a genocide. And as Father was said, there's no genocide without witnesses. I remember when I arrived to France, and more than 20 years ago, coming from Guatemala, when we don't talk too much about the Holocaust. Even in my family, I don't know why they had some books about the Holocaust. And I always tried to read, so I knew the story. And I remember that for the French people, this memory of the Holocaust was very present through the images of Drancy, this place where all the French Jews were deported to the concentration camps, and also the Rafle de Belleville, which is when they surrounded all the Jews in Belleville and they brought it to Drancy. And the French were telling at that time, this will never happen again. We will never allow that our Jews will be deported or they will suffer because they are Jews. And unfortunately, 23 years later, these feelings and this memory in the French population has changed, as in many places in the world. So how can we talk about the Holocaust? I will say that another particularity from the Holocaust is to look at how many Holocaust deniers are everywhere. I don't think there's another genocide or another mass crime where has so many Holocaust deniers. People who are really working hard the same way that you are working hard to teach the Holocaust. There are another group of people who are working hard to say that the Holocaust does not exist. So the Holocaust deniers are very strong on this, and I think that they're very happy to know that there won't be very soon any more survivors to tell the story, because they will have more opportunity to find, I would say, excuses because they cannot present real facts. And that is the reason why we need to see the Holocaust in a different way, not to repeat the stories all the time. And this is why the work that we are doing is more like a forensic investigation, is really to collect the proofs in order to say, okay, here are the archives, here are the photo archives, but here are also the testimonies, and we are talking about the neighbors, those who saw what happened. And when you collect all the evidences, you can understand the crimes. So it's another way that I think we need to be prepared in the future in order to teach the Holocaust. So talking about the Holocaust by bullets, because as I was saying, the Holocaust is unique, and we don't have to say that it was like another genocide. But this specific part of the Holocaust in Eastern Europe, who were shootings and mass graves, is the model that we find today. And that's why my lecture this morning is about the legacy of the Holocaust by bullets. So with all this expertise that we've had for 20 years investigating about the Holocaust in Eastern Europe, someone from the State Department in the United States came to Father Rebois and say, would you like to investigate in Guatemala what happened during the 80s? As you saw in the movie, between 250,000 and 100,000 people were killed and disappeared in that specific period from the military dictatorship. And this person from the State Department here in the United States understood very well the way that we were doing the investigation in Eastern Europe, and that's how they told us, try to do a couple of villages and to understand what happened. So Father Rebois went to Guatemala. I was not very happy because I would say it confronted me also for a reality in a country that I didn't know myself, being from Guatemala. So we went to look for the archives, and there's a special commission also done by a priest in Guatemala, where he collected all the information of the killings village by village in Guatemala. And with the same way of working in Eastern Europe, so there was a small team going into the villages once all these archives have been translated and ready to use to have the first facts of what happened in the villages. And we went there. And when we realized that there were a lot of parallels, ways of committing these crimes in Guatemala as well. So there was a killing of men first. There was a selection. Women were raped as well. And sometimes the whole village was burned or killed and put into the mass graves. And when we realized also that the methodology of the perpetrators, without talking about politics, because in Guatemala it's a very political question, and it's not the fact to say it was the army or it was the guerrilla. It's just talking about the victims and give them the voice to the victims. Those who were forgotten, because many times, also when there is a genocide, a mass crime, or a war, we focus more on the politics, on which side is a good one and which side is not a good one, and sometimes we forget those who are in the middle and those who are dying. So we collected more than 300 testimonies from indigenous people in Guatemala to have an idea of what happened there, to try to understand what was the mechanism used to make villages disappear. In the country, we couldn't continue doing this research because it's very hard to find funds to continue this research. And also, you need to justify all the time that what you're doing is to understand the story, the history, and not to be part of any political side, because it's a kind of taboo still in Guatemala, which is so bad. And at the same time, it's something that I admire from the Holocaust is not only all the material that we have available to teach the Holocaust, to learn from the Holocaust, but also the recognition of the Germans that they committed the genocide. I think that did give us a big opportunity to talk freely about what happened during the Second World War. So with Guatemala, we found a lot of parallels that we found also in Eastern Europe about the methodology to kill people. And then in 2016, as you saw, Father Rebois, 2014, I'm sorry, because it's going to be the 10th anniversary of the Yazidi genocide in Iraq. Same thing, Father Rebois was like very touched to see the images on TV, because today we cannot deny what something is happening. It's not that 80 years ago that to get the newspaper with a couple of photos maybe will take 6 months later with the facts, but today we always see almost indirect what is happening in the world, so we cannot say we don't know, we were not aware of that. And Father Rebois decided to find some funds and going to Iraq. Same thing, to understand what happened there. What was this methodology to willing to exterminate the Yazidi people in Iraq. And once again, we were facing, in this case, we didn't have archives, but we are facing the same methodology That's what I will say. There are no 10 ways to commit a genocide. There are not 10 different ways to kill another population. So it was the same. The units from the Islamic states arrive in the villages of the Yazidis. They select men, women, elder people. And then, well, you all know that they have an ideology. So among the women, those who were young, those who were virgin, those who were married, most of the men, they were killed immediately by shooting and put into the mass graves. And women and children were brought to be part of a slavery system that the Islamic State created in all these territories. Women were sold between 20 to 40 times to different men to become sex slavery. And something that was very particular about this genocide is that children, they were indoctrinated to become terrorists. So they went to special schools to build an army with children, with young Yazidis. And they succeeded to destroy their identity. Many times we interview very young teenagers that just escaped from ISIS, and they don't identify themselves anymore with the Yazidis. They don't identify themselves anymore with their families. They believe they are part of the Islamic State, and they just want to find back who they think were their parents among the Islamic State. So once again, we find all these parallels that we found in the Holocaust, and to allow us to understand this mechanism in Iraq. We're still working in Iraq. There are still survivors coming back. Most of them are women who are in Turkey, especially now. Sometimes they succeed to escape, and you see also how the mentality has changed, because sometimes these women come back to their community without feeling herself part of the Yazidis, because I spent already so many years with families of ISIS. Some of them had children, and I had to let them back in the other countries in order to go back to their communities. And as Dr. Romer said, there is this exhibit that is here at the next building, who tells a little bit about the testimonies of all these women. And once again, we understand the trauma and the consequences of such an awful crimes that are still committed. And we will say, okay, this happened 10 years ago. But then 2 years ago, we discovered in the news that Russia decides to invade Ukraine. And weeks later, we discover in the news that there are mass graves in the villages in Ukraine. We discover once again, we see the images on TV to see how the Russians kill civilians, how they torture civilians, how they use the same system, killings, shooting by bullets, and mass graves. So once again, we are confronted to this way of killing people by hand, a man against another man, where each victim saw its perpetrator. So we say, what can we do for Ukraine? I mean, this is a country that we've been traveling during 20 years. So we know the smallest village in Ukraine. I think that's what Father was says, I know Ukraine better than I know France. And it's true that we were going everywhere in Ukraine. And the actual government in Ukraine, because they knew the work we were doing to collect the proofs of the Holocaust in Ukraine, they asked us if we could help them to collect also the proofs and the testimonies of the crimes committed against the Ukrainian, the civilians. And that's how we decided to, once again, raise funds and to help collecting these testimonies. And once again, we find the same parallels that we found 80 years ago with the Holocaust. The same, sometimes selection of the people in the village. Men who are the first one to be killed, women raped, men also. There are many testimonies of men who were raped by the Russian soldiers. And particularity, I will say, from this war is that in many cases, the Russians kept some key people in the villages in Ukraine, and they tortured them until they accept to sign a paper that they work for the Russians. So we are like trying to go deep to understand the reason why the Russians are doing that. And this is the work that we are doing with something that is happening today, with the images that you see on TV today. I don't know how much we speak about the war in Ukraine, the United States. In France, it's like every day. You know that Europe is very concerned about it because we cannot lose a country like that. I mean, there is a danger for the democracy in Europe, so we speak about that every day in the news. But once again, what I wanted to say is, for you to understand, is that we find, once again, all these parallels that we found during the Holocaust in Eastern Europe 80 years ago, and the way that the Nazi Germans were killing the Jews in this place. And I want to almost end with a last point that I would like to share with you. And I want to read this poem, this well-known written that personally explained to me many things, from Pastor Martin Niemöller. He says, first they came for the communists and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. I think that for me personally, it's a very powerful message because I realized that also the way to succeed at genocide and a mass crime is because of the indifference that you find everywhere. You found it in Eastern Europe through the testimonies of the witnesses. I mean, you can judge or not. They're telling the testimonies today, and thanks to the witnesses, we can understand how the Nazi Germans succeeded to kill so many millions of Jews and Roma in Eastern Europe. And how is that when you are not concerned, when you know that you are not part of this target group who is going to be killed, or who is going to be punished, in many cases you don't do anything. I always say to young people, especially we have different programs with the students, I always say, you don't know yourself in how you will act if you were back 80 years ago in these villages. But I see the indifference of people when you feel you are not concerned, and I can talk also about my own experience in Guatemala. I was a child when these killings were happening. I was born and raised in Guatemala City, which was very protective, I would say, area from what was happening. But they were killing people 2 hours outside of Guatemala City, 100 kilometers outside of Guatemala City, with the biggest indifference of the local people. And not many people did many things. And I will always remember the first time I went to Iraq. The ISIS was still not far from Duhok is where there are many camps. And I remember being with a team on a very nice mall in Duhok next to a lake. And people were having a normal life. And I was thinking that the ISIS was just in the other side of the lake, in the villages, killing people. And once again, this is a big question for me, a big human question, that I will say we are so indifferent when we are not, we don't feel part of the target group to be killed. And this makes a success for a genocide. It makes the perpetrators to succeed at genocide and a mass crime. Because they know that not many people will act and will try to stop them. And to finish my lecture, what my thoughts and my experience that I wanted to share with you in order to understand what we have found during all these years of investigation. I will say that we have a challenge today. We are all here doing research, but also teaching about the Holocaust. And we have a challenge today because you remember when I talked to you when I arrived to France 23 years ago, and I was listening to the French saying, never again we will let our Jews suffer, be killed, or because they were Jews. And unfortunately, it has changed. Now there were a lot of Jews being killed in France because they were Jews. And I could never imagine seeing with my own eyes the anti-Semitic acts that happened after October 7th, everywhere. When I saw the images on TV on university campus here in the United States where Jews needed to be protected in order not to be kicked off on in order to be punished or damaged because they were Jews. So imagine that, because they were Jews. It's not even a political question. It's just because they were Jews, they deserve to be punished. So I never thought that I will see with my own eyes these anti-Semitic acts everywhere. And then I feel more than ever engaged to talk, and I think that will be our mission when we teach, when we study, when we talk about the Holocaust, to say, be careful, because at any moment we can be again taken by these ideologies of hate and intolerance and anti-Semitism that is so present in the society today. And the problem is the indifference of the people. I remember the first time that in France they killed someone because he was a Jew. There were huge demonstrations in the streets of Paris. All the politicians were there. Nobody was there when they killed the last. It was a woman Holocaust survivor who was killed in France. Nobody went outside to make a demonstration. So we need to keep strong, and we need to find the best way to take the consequences and to teach the consequences of what was the Holocaust, because we can learn a lot, and we need to try to do our best to build a better society with young people especially, to wake them up and to be aware and to make them responsible for what position they will take if they find themselves as a journalist or as a politician tomorrow in a place where there is a war happening and that mass crimes are happening and that genocide is happening. So thank you very much for your paying attention to me. Thank you.
I think we have time for some questions, but we are just trying to get any of the mics. If you have a question, raise your arm. Stop and then cross.
Yeah, I was in Rwanda in 2002, and I am surprised that you did not mention it, or do you know any studies to compare what happened in the Holocaust with Rwanda? The killing was not done by bullets, it was done by machete. But, and I don't, it's hard to tell what the government, because at that time there were clashes in the government. So in the Holocaust, there was government trying to kill a population. Rwanda was different.
Yes, we know very much about what happened in Rwanda. I went myself to Rwanda a couple of times, and I admire the work that they're doing. I mean, this is a memorial that they built about the genocide in Rwanda. But what I share with you today is the investigation that my organization has been conducted in different fields. We haven't worked on Rwanda. There is always question of finding funds. I think that intentions are there. And we are about, just to, you will see it on Facebook. At some point, we are about to sign an agreement with the Rwanda Minister of Justice, because they will let us to help also to collect testimonies. And they have both. They have the testimonies of survivors, but they have also the testimonies of the perpetrators who are in jail. So they want us to use our analytic comprehension of these kind of crimes in order to do interviews from both sides and to have another perspective on the story of Rwanda. So hopefully next time I could also talk to you about Rwanda.
So thank you so much for your presentation this morning. You talked about the denial movement for people that deny the Holocaust, and I was wondering if there are sort of organized denial movements for the other genocides like Rwanda, Iraq, Guatemala, and I'm not aware of them, and so I guess my question is a little bit rhetorical, but if there aren't, I guess my question is, why? What's different about the Holocaust, and why is it so important? Why do you think it's so important for people to deny it? Is it just about anti-Semitism? Is there something else going on? And I would just like to hear your thoughts.
I will say that the Holocaust is really the anti-Semitism, the key. I think that this is the biggest motivation, the main motivation for this group of people is to prove that it didn't exist. But you find deniers in most of the, I would say in all the mass crimes and genocides. If I take the example of Guatemala, where I know a little bit more because I'm half of my life part of the Guatemalan society, you have a whole part of the population, even in a family sitting on a table, there will be the half the population who will deny what happened. And the other part will say it did happen. But I think that they are less organized, as you said, like the Holocaust deniers, because the Holocaust deniers, they are, it's not only an ideology, but they are scholars. So in the same way that we spend our time collecting the proofs of the Holocaust, they are spending their time on a historical basis to find and to prove that it didn't exist. But I will say the base and the main motivation for the groups is anti-Semitism, is the hate against the Jews. And that makes also a particularity for the Holocaust comparing to other genocides and mass crimes.
Just real quick, other than the combat situation, what do you find are your biggest roadblocks or your hurdles currently in Ukraine and Iraq, given the situation as far as the governments go, and the infiltration in those governments by the combating forces?
Well, I don't know exactly how this could influence the governments of both governments. But I will say that there's always a war, and inside the war, we always talk about territories. We always talk about the conquering of winning territories and things like that. We forget many times that mass killings are happening in the middle of the war. And in many cases, the journalists, they are more focused to say, take the example with Ukraine, specialists to say, oh, well, this week the Russian army won X kilometers of territory. And they forget about to mention what these troops are doing in the villages they are conquering. And this is what allows also that all these crimes are committed easily. I don't know if I answer your question a little bit.
What do you find, what are the difficulties of identifying those graves given that situation that you just described? What are the difficulties in locating them, hurdles, that kind of thing?
I think that the most difficult thing is that in current and modern mass genocide, I will say that it's easier because it's not a secret, it's recently, so the memory of the people it's present, and in many cases the bodies are still there. So I will say it's less difficult than in investigating about the Holocaust, for example, in Eastern Europe. What is surprising, according to our experience, is not only from the survivors, but also from the witnesses, the neighbors, how we call them, is that they want to talk. I mean, there's no silence, there's no shame. It's that really they want to talk. When we do interview survivors from Ukraine, they are proud to tell their testimony because they believe in justice. So they bring us to the places they know, because sometimes we see like big mass graves, but in some cases also they kill a man or a woman in a garden, in a house. There is like small pit digged in order to bury the bodies. And as Father was says, let's try to do something to avoid that in 10 years we'll build a memorial about all the killings, but that we could do something to stop these killings before, or to denounce those who are committing the killings.
Thank you very much, Carlo. I'm deeply grateful for your presence, and I have two questions that relate to one another. One is whether or not Jihad in Unum has ever done much with perpetrators. We've heard about the witnesses and how sometimes they feel like they are collaborators just for digging the graves. But there are still some perpetrators alive, and they're not likely to go to any court that I know of, and their testimony is still valuable to us. And I wonder if there are any among those 7,000 interviews in which you intentionally sought out the basically the self-accusing crime. The second is more about you. That I was wondering how you came to be engaged in this, knowing, say, of Oscar Romero and how he used forensics to do those homilies that were the voice of the voiceless in Salvador, or how did you and Patrick become a team together for the world, and warning us of our very imminent and close future?
Well, thank you. Well, talking about how the Father Boane and I worked together for more than 20 years. Well, I made the story short. when I finished my studies in Guatemala City, I had English and Spanish as language, and I had opportunity to go to France for 6 months to learn French. And it was at the same I met Father Bois. He hosted me in his place during the 6 months that I was taking this advanced French course at Alliance Française. And I was supposed to go back to Guatemala. And at the same time, what was the word that Father Bois uses? He believes in providence, in what kind of miracle that happens, and that is how he built the organization. And Jihad didn't exist. So Father Bois was appointed from the Catholic Church for the relationship with Jews. But he at the same time was understanding that these killings happened in Eastern Europe. So his assistant at that time quit. And he said, Marco, why don't you stay work with me? And I say, okay, let's change my visa. I changed my visa for 2 years. And I say, let's try. I was not sure. And I think that when you do this kind of work, you find a sense for your life, because waking up every morning to know that you are not going to a bank and make only money, but you are doing something for humanity, I think that is a big motivation. And that's why 23 years later, I'm still here and working together with Father Dubois. So that is for that part of the question. And about the perpetrators, that's very interesting, because you know that when we go to a village and we knock at the door to know if someone saw the killing of the Jews, sometimes we expect that if the person was a collaborator or killed the Jews, he has an awful face. And those who saved the Jews or those who don't have anything to do with the killings have a nice face. But in fact, we never know. When someone opens the door and we ask them if they saw the killings of the Jews, and they say yes, and if they, would you accept to give us a testimony, and say yes, we never know what this person made. And just give you an example. There was a man, and that is one of the methodology that I will say that we use when we do the interview, and that's why we don't have a protocol of questions, because it's really to get the confidence of the witness and really to get to the story, to the memories of this witness. And we never show in our faces when a witness is giving a testimony. And there was a very specific example that I will give you. So the man opened the door, and he was like very proud to tell about the killings of the Jews and everything. And we understood it in the middle of in the interview that in fact he was a perpetrator. He participated himself in the killing of the Jews. And at the end of the testimony, he got up from his chair, and he went to look for the belt, military belt he wore when he was young. And he was so proud to show us that he didn't get any weight, and that the belt was still fitting perfectly on his body, and we didn't show anything. Because for us it's very important to get to the facts. So if someone was working at the Gestapo or keeping the Jews in the ghetto, and he tells us the testimony, it is as important as the children who saw the killings, because this allows us to understand what happened there. So yes, among these 7,000 testimonies, we have some perpetrators too.
Marco, I know that you guys are doing work in the colleges now. You're taking a lot of this information and you're teaching students. Can you talk about the work at Georgetown that Father Dubois is doing, and also in Guatemala at the universities?
So I think there's a lot of work to do, especially in campus universities. I mean, as soon as we begin to educate and to teach children about what happened, the better it is. But I think that there is a huge problem in the campus at the universities. So we are building programs in universities in the United States and many public universities in France. We more and more are asked to do these kind of programs, and is to talk about the work of Yaharinum, the work in Eastern Europe, the work in modern contemporary mass crimes and genocides, and then having the experience to bring students into the field to see the topography of where these killings happened. But you know, a young man, a young woman today, 18 years old, 19 years old, I mean, we're talking about the Second World War or the Holocaust. This is not the story of their grandparents. This is like the story of the great parents. There are other questions that come out today with the young people, and it's a question of ethics, choices, and they like very much the approach of our organization, bringing not only the proofs of what was the Holocaust by bullets, but also to bring this perspective from the witnesses, listening to the stories and understanding how these people, sometimes they helped, sometimes they collaborated, I say. And this is, I would say, a unique program. We still need to work more specifically, because we need to work now on the legacy of Father Dubois, how he understanding of all this experience could be brought to the children and universities. And these are the programs we're doing. And Guatemala is a challenge because many of the Guatemalan population, they have never seen a Jew in their life. I remember an exhibit that we did in the second biggest city of Guatemala, and the Israeli ambassador came to the opening of the exhibit. And I remember people who wanted to take a picture because it was the first time they saw a Jew. So we have really a challenge because we had the taboo of what happened also in Guatemala. But it's the same. The universities in Guatemala, especially the private universities, are very Catholic. And what they want is from us is to train the generations to make choices, ethics, how we become more tolerant, how we can fight hate, and of course anti-Semitism. Because even if Guatemala is a very close country with Israel, and because of the evangelical population in Guatemala also who loved the Jews, and I will say that anti-Semitism is not present, there's still the danger. And so part of the programs that we're doing with the university, but also with high school teachers, is about anti-Semitism, because many ideas could be repeated or acts could be done without being conscious that are anti-Semitic acts. So I think it's a challenge, I would say, for our organization to bring this history, this part of the history, which is the Holocaust, in a country that is not concerned about it. But at the same time, there's interest in knowing about that.
Right. Then please join me one more time.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Thank you very much.